Ever go to the doctor and find out that your liver enzymes are high? That can sound pretty frightening, but the good news is there's probably something you can do about that. And that's why today we're talking about the 10 best tests to assess your liver function and what you can do to protect your liver. This is a model of a liver. It's not a real liver. It actually would be a lot more red, like burgundy looking, and it would be very vascular. So if you actually touch the liver, it would be bloody if you broke it. And the liver, this is kind of small. It'd probably be twice the size, and it sits right here, right underneath your ribs on your right-hand side. The tricky part is that when your liver is sick, there's often no symptoms in the early stages of damage, and you can feel completely fine, and yet toxins like fat could be building up inside your liver, inflaming it. Maybe your AST or ALT levels are high. Maybe your bilirubin is creeping up. The thing is, those tests don't actually represent your liver function. And by the time those tests are abnormal, inflammation has already caused damage, and sometimes it could be permanent. However, there are tests that actually measure your liver function, and they probably have been abnormal for years, and yet you never knew they were markers of your liver health. But the good news is, when you remove the insult, the toxins, the liver can 100% repair itself until it can't. Now, you're gonna want to watch until the end of this video because your liver is your body's hardest working organ.
The liver, very important organ. It does things we haven't even discovered yet.
And it filters so many toxins every day to help you balance your hormones, to store your vitamins, and even help you make energy to support all your other vital organs. So you should take more than 10 minutes to learn how to protect and keep your liver healthy and what to do when it's injured. So buckle up. This video will be full of life-changing liver facts that people simply don't talk about. Did you know that there are so many toxins from some of the stuff in the foods that you eat, or maybe over-the-counter medications or prescription medications, and of course, alcohol, and sometimes even herbs? They can all be toxic to your liver. And the only clue is routine blood work called liver function tests. First liver function test will blow your mind away. High cholesterol. Surprised, aren't you? Everyone only thinks about cholesterol with heart disease, but they're not connecting all the dots. It starts with your liver. Cholesterol is a powerful window into your liver health because the liver is the main organ that makes, packages, and clears cholesterol. And when cholesterol numbers are abnormal, they often reflect stress on the liver, dysfunction of the liver itself. About 70 to 80% of all your blood cholesterol is produced in the liver. Now, if cholesterol is consistently high, it often means the liver is overproducing cholesterol or failing to remove it from your blood, especially if you keep putting it in from saturated fat. And yes, this can inflame your liver, and it's all tied to insulin resistance, which I'll talk about later. Now, cholesterol isn't a quick in, quick out molecule. Once the liver makes and releases it into the bloodstream inside LDL particles, HDL particles, or VLDL particles, it can circulate 2 to 5 days before being cleared or recycled. Hence, changing your diet the day before your blood test, it's not going to improve fasting cholesterol numbers. Now, the liver constantly tries to balance this pool. It makes cholesterol, it packages into lipoproteins, it pulls some back out, and then it sends cholesterol into the bile, which then gets stored in your gallbladder to be used when you eat fat. But if the liver makes too much cholesterol, or if you're eating too much saturated fat or calories, or if the bile becomes too concentrated from fasting or dehydration, then the cholesterol can crystallize into gallstones that can block your biliary tree to prevent the flow of bile, causing inflammation in the liver. Now, these stones can be larger than oyster pearls. So if you want to avoid gallstones, then you should avoid fasting and dehydration and gaining excessive weight and eating an excessive amount of saturated fat. Also, it's important to keep the bile flowing. And how do you do that? You avoid constipation by eating foods high in soluble fiber found in whole plant foods that bind to bile acids to prevent it from being reabsorbed. That's how bowel movements lower cholesterol. You're literally expelling them into the toilet. And when you eat whole food with fiber, then your gut microbiome can ferment the soluble fiber into short-chain fatty acids, which then feeds your colonic cells to give it energy so that it helps to move, because it takes muscle to move in your body, and movement expels poop. Now, the key is to prevent the bile from staying stagnant, which promotes stone formation. Hence, people who have low fiber diets are at high risk of getting gallstones. Okay, let's flex those brain muscles again, because the next lab will again blow your mind. High triglycerides, which happens to be from eating too much sugar, too much saturated fat, too many calories, or just being insulin resistant and overweight. Triglycerides are the main form of fat in your bloodstream. And after you eat excessive calories, especially from sugar, refined carbs like flour, fat, and alcohol, those excess calories are all converted into triglycerides, and usually it should be stored in your fat cells for later. But the problem is they can be stuck in your liver. Now, how do you know if you're eating in excess? Go weigh yourself daily. That has been shown to keep people's weight down and to help people lose weight. So how are triglycerides a function of your liver health? Well, normally your liver packages triglycerides into VLDL particles for transport, and it's responsible to break down triglycerides during fasting to release fatty acids for energy. Now, the problem is excess triglycerides, they may not make it to fat cells, and they can stay in the liver, which then leads to non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And fat is bad for the liver. Your liver should not have any fat. And fatty livers, they get inflamed, non-alcoholic steatohepatitis. And that inflammation ultimately leads to scar tissue. And the collection of scar tissue makes your liver fibrotic. And then that scar tissue, when it replaces the liver cells, it shrinks and it becomes hard or cirrhotic. And you can get fatty liver from excessive carbohydrates, excessive fat intake, or you can directly get it from the byproduct of fermented carbs called alcohol. So before processed food companies started massively producing sugar, starch, and fat as a food, alcoholic fatty liver disease was the number one cause of fatty liver. And of course, that's from excessive alcohol use. That's really how people got fatty liver. Alcohol drives triglyceride production, but impairs its breakdown. It worsens the fat in the liver. So what's an abnormal triglyceride? Well, a fasting triglyceride above 150 milligrams per deciliter is considered elevated, indicating you probably have some fatty liver. Now, the solution is to avoid alcohol, to avoid refined carbohydrates, saturated fat, chemicalized sugars, and to see your medical doctor to monitor whether or not you have cirrhosis or even cancer. And this is because cirrhosis puts you at higher risk of cancer. And while you wait for the appointment, stop the alcohol, stop the sweets, especially with those fats. Eat a whole food, low-fat, plant-based diet, low in processed, refined grains, low in added sugar, and low in fat, but high in whole food fiber, including whole fruits, to get multiple healthy bowel movements every day. Now, the next test will be even more shocking, but you'll understand why once I explain it. Low cholesterol. Yes, I know I just talked about high cholesterol, but low cholesterol is also an indication of your liver health. That's why when you don't finish my videos, you have an incomplete understanding of health. And you're going to want to listen to the explanation because too many people falsely think that low cholesterol causes higher mortality. But on the other hand, you have the other extreme, so-called experts saying you can go and squash your cholesterol to just about zero and you'll be okay. Yeah, I don't think either extreme works in real life. You know, when you're too low, you're going to have a problem. When you're too high, you're going to have a problem. Most of the time, most things work at just the right dose. And usually these are viewpoints from people who aren't thinking about the immune system. And by the way, millions of people who have low cholesterol take medications to get that low cholesterol. Now, that's not indicative of liver problems unless your medication is a cause of your liver problems. And if you're unsure, talk to your own medical doctor, and you may even consider a hepatologist who are the liver gurus who have gone through many more years of training to assess liver health. I mean, think about it. Whoever manages as liver transplant patients, which are hepatologists, are the medical doctors who know all about the liver. So when I'm talking about low cholesterol, I'm referring to people who are not on cholesterol-lowering medications, but have very low blood LDL cholesterol, which could mean that they have an awesome high-fiber diet, and usually those people will have an elevated HDL cholesterol, or it could be a marker the liver is struggling to produce enough cholesterol, period, which often happens in advanced liver disease, such as cirrhosis or late-stage hepatitis, severe fatty liver, or when someone is acutely severely ill during a life-threatening infection, trauma, burns, or sepsis. Now, cholesterol levels during these critical times, they fall rapidly, they dive. And this is because the liver shifts its priorities. So instead of making cholesterol and lipoproteins, it's now trying to support your immune system to keep you alive. So it makes inflammatory proteins called acute phase reactants like C-reactive protein, fibrinogen, clotting factors. They are helping you fight the crisis. And if you're lost, basically the liver is busy doing other stuff that is critical for survival. And that's why cholesterol can be super low. But far too many people ignore this fact that at the end of the day, the immune system uses cholesterol and lipoproteins to neutralize bacterial toxins, especially from endotoxin, from your gut bacteria, gram-negative bacteria. But if you have too much cholesterol in the bloodstream, you potentially can plug up the blood flow with plaque. And like I mentioned, everything in life, if you have too little or too high, is usually bad. Usually you have to be in the middle. When you're so sick, you're usually in the hospital. But there are also lots of reasons to have low cholesterol that may have nothing to do with the liver. So let's think what happens when a person goes to the emergency room. First, they get some IV fluids, right? Well, that by itself can dilute your blood so that the cholesterol numbers are lower. And when you are sick, your blood cholesterol is also redistributed to other tissues. So that would also result in lower blood cholesterol numbers. However, when you have a life-threatening illness like sepsis, very low cholesterol, especially low HDL, has been linked to high risk of death. HDL acts as a part of your innate immune system. It binds and inactivates harmful lipids like lipopolysaccharide to prevent excessive inflammation. So when HDL is low, this is a signal your body can't keep up with demand. So people who say that high HDL is not protective, they're not thinking about your immune system because they are laser focused on heart disease and atherosclerosis. I have a high HDL for my diet, but I don't eat my diet so I can have a high HDL. I eat my diet so that I can be healthy. And as a byproduct, my HDL is higher. And I'm the first to admit that there's a lot of conflicting data on whether or not statins improve or reduce infections, especially viral infections. I don't know. I think the jury is still out there. But I work really hard not to qualify for statins because there's enough side effects to convince me I can do this without statins and that whole food just has side benefits. I use that as my medicine. And I also work really hard not to pick up viruses.
Hi, friends. I am so thrilled that you want to take charge of your health and take charge of your food. Now, I know nutrition can be complex, but it doesn't have to be. And I'm here to support you in this lifelong journey. So if you point your camera app to this QR code, it'll take you to a link for a free handout that I created just for you. And if you like it, if you want to see other handouts, please go to the link in my show notes and then you can leave me your feedback on what I could do to help you in your journey. Okay, back to the video now.
But it's really important to understand why certain people have low cholesterol in dire life-threatening situations. And when you understand this physiology, then you will better be able to determine if someone is BSing you by citing some references to justify walking around with super high cholesterol levels or artificially suppressing cholesterol to super low levels and to think that either extreme is okay. In acute liver failure, let's say fulminant viral hepatitis or acetaminophen overdose, cholesterol can plummet because the liver can't make it at all. And this can happen even if the original insult wasn't at the liver. And this is why prevention is always better than having to fight and recover. That's the importance of a healthy immune system. However, when the liver takes a direct hit, like picking up a hepatitis virus, it can get pretty bad pretty quickly. And you're going to want to listen to all of this because these are super common problems, potentially even preventable, and not knowing just makes you at higher risk and more susceptible. Hundreds of millions of people are unaware that they actually have a liver virus living in their liver. And believe it or not, some of these viruses are actually curable, and many are preventable. So let's start with your food. The other day I was volunteering at church where I serve at the refreshment stand, and someone came in with a box of raspberries. And I commented on how they were super healthy. And she said, yeah, that's my breakfast, but I didn't get to wash it. And I hope that that's okay. I gently suggested that maybe she really should reconsider that, because raspberries are one of those fruits that are hand-picked, and hand-picked raspberries usually means that people can transfer diseases. So berries are one of those fruits that I never eat unwashed. Sometimes those diseases can be hepatitis A, which is spread through contaminated food and water. Now, the virus, it targets your liver, and you will feel like crap. It's not going to be subtle. And I've seen people go into fulminant liver failure because of an acute hepatitis A infection. And that's why people like me, healthcare workers and food care workers, we can take medicines to help prime our immune system to make antibodies against hepatitis A to protect ourselves and the public we serve. However, most people who have no access to healthcare may have never been offered these medicines. It's never too late. No matter your age, if you take the medications, you could also make antibodies to protect yourself against hepatitis A. You never know when you're going to eat contaminated food or water. But remember that you do need to sleep the night before you take these medications. Otherwise, your immune system, they're going to be too tired to make any antibodies. Now, keep in mind, the goal of any of these medicines is to help you fight the infection yourself. So it may not guarantee that you're not going to get infected. It just gives you a better fight. And so it doesn't fight the infection for you. So hence, you have to give your body some time to make these antibodies, roughly about 4 weeks. And this becomes an issue when people are trying to prepare for last-minute travel plans. By the way, in your lifetime, how many intimate partners have you had? When you're intimate with one person, it's like you're intimate with everybody else that one person has been intimate with their entire life, because that one person collects germs and viruses from previous partners. And that's one way people get hepatitis B virus, which is spread through blood and body fluids, including your saliva, your snot, and your pee. In Asia and Africa, there's actually vertical transmission where infected mothers pass along hepatitis B during childbirth to their children. And this can result in lifelong chronic hepatitis B to that infant who grows up to be an adult. Chronic hepatitis B infections elevate the risk of getting liver cancer. The good news is doctors can give newborns at risk hepatitis B antibodies. And there are also medications to help children and adults train their immune system to fight hepatitis B. But it takes 3 doses over a period of 6 months. And you can think of it as a backwards allergy shot used to train a person's immune system to respond a certain way. Now, if you're interested in these super life-saving immune trainers, talk to your own medical providers. Prevention is a key to hepatitis B virus, because unfortunately, there is no cure. Plus, when you get hepatitis B virus, you're also susceptible to hepatitis D virus. And the combination of B and D together, that's just going to speed up any progression of inflammation in your liver. And people with chronic hepatitis B can also get hepatitis E virus, which is basically spread through contaminated water and food, especially undercooked pork. Hence, it's important to avoid the most common reasons why people get food poisoning, which is overgrowth of infections from poor storage, poor handling, poor cleaning, poor cooking, especially of animal products, including raw dairy and eggs. And it's not liver friendly to drink raw milk or eat raw eggs or raw meat, especially raw seafood like oysters, who are literally the trash cans of the ocean. And your liver is such a vital immune organ that people with chronic liver inflammation, they're at super high risk for fatal outcomes when they pick up a bacteria called Vibrio bacteria, which is unique to seawater and brackish water. Hence, the danger of eating filter feeders from those waters. The next 3 liver function tips are measurements of how well your blood clots, called PT, PTT, and INR. So what does clotting have to do with your liver? Everything, because your liver makes clotting factors. And when your liver is sick, it may not make any clotting factors, which means if you cut yourself, you're not going to be able to stop the bleeding. But you don't have to cut yourself to bleed. The force of your heartbeat can potentially rupture blood vessels. Yeah, spontaneous bleeding. And in liver disease, clotting factors production falls. That makes PT, PTT, and INR go up. But it's not necessarily always a liver problem when they're high. It could be due to vitamin K deficiency. Now, in order to activate these clotting factors, the liver needs vitamin K, specifically vitamin K1. And when you have a biliary obstruction or cholestatic liver disease, you don't absorb vitamin K well. But the reality is, many people don't eat enough vitamin K-rich foods, which are found in green leafy vegetables. Take a look at this list. You should eat some of these foods, but don't confuse vitamin K1 with vitamin K2, which is found in fermented foods like natto. K2 does not have a pivotal role in clotting, unlike K1. Now, if someone takes K1 and their PT, PTT, and INR improve, that means their liver is still working. And by the way, the INR is so important that it is used as a model for end-stage liver disease to help people predict survival rates, and it determines liver transplant priority. Steve Jobs, the guy who invented your smart device, was placed on a transplant list in 2009. And I bet the next test will also surprise you. The seventh lab is your blood insulin levels. Now, when you have high insulin, you have insulin resistance, which is a hallmark of metabolic disease in the liver. Now, the liver is insulin's control center. And after you eat, glucose enters the bloodstream. Then that causes a pancreas to release insulin. And the first organ that receives that insulin is the liver via the portal vein. And then the liver decides what to do with that sugar: store glucose, burn glucose, or release glucose later. And in a normal state, insulin makes the liver store glucose in the form of glycogen, and it shuts down glucose release. Even if you don't eat any sugar, your liver, through a process called gluconeogenesis and glycogen breakdown, can make glucose to release in your bloodstream, because you actually won't survive if you have absolutely no glucose. But when there is too much insulin, like in insulin resistance, that insulin also stimulates fat production in a process called de novo lipogenesis to turn carbohydrates into triglycerides, or a form of fat. But when you have a state of insulin resistance in the liver, well, the liver also forgets or cannot and really just doesn't shut off glucose production, even though insulin is present, and that's what it's supposed to do. This is called fasting hyperglycemia, or high blood sugars even though you haven't eaten. And on top of that, the glucose is turned into fat to cause non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, or what is now known as metabolic dysfunction-associated steatotic liver disease. That's pretty much a mouthful. Basically, this is fatty liver, which then leads to type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and progression of fatty liver to fibrosis and cirrhosis, and then potentially liver cancer. Hence, this is why it's important to prevent insulin resistance. Now, the eighth lab is a protein called albumin, which is the most abundant plasma protein made exclusively by the liver. It keeps fluid in the bloodstream, called oncotic pressure, and carries hormones, fatty acids, drugs, and bilirubin. Albumin is a marker of liver health because the liver is the only organ that can make albumin. And when you have low albumin, that signals chronic or advanced liver disease like cirrhosis. Now, this is not an early marker of liver disease. Actually, most people have inflammation for several years or has serious inflammation so that the liver shuts off and can't make albumin. However, the kidneys also play a huge role in how much albumin you have in your bloodstream. So if your kidney is not healthy, let's say it has nephrotic syndrome, then it will pee out albumin. Other conditions that can cause low albumin includes chronic inflammation and malnutrition. But if a person had cirrhosis, a low albumin is actually a pretty poor prognosis. The ninth lab is actually another protein, an iron storage protein, made mostly by the liver, but the spleen and the bone marrow can also contribute. This protein is called ferritin. A person's blood ferritin reflects the total body iron stores. Your liver is a main storage organ for iron, and a high ferritin, really over 1,000 nanograms per milliliter, that can signal a genetic condition called hemochromatosis. Hemochromatosis is an iron overload condition that can lead to cirrhosis, liver cancer, diabetes, and heart disease. But ferritin is really non-specific. It's also what we call an acute phase reactant, and it can rise with any condition that causes chronic inflammation or acute inflammation, including fatty liver, obesity, infections, and other liver inflammatory conditions without involving excessive iron. Now, if your liver cells, called hepatocytes, are injured, it will release ferritin, so that high levels may simply just reflect ongoing damage. To diagnose excess iron overload, other labs are necessary. And it's important to get this condition diagnosed early as possible, because once the iron gets stored in the liver, it never comes out, and it just irritates the liver. And people with these iron storage diseases, they not only need to change their diet, but they may need aggressive treatment to remove that iron in their blood by removing blood. Otherwise, the iron will lead to an accelerated progression of liver disease. This is not an uncommon condition. Every 1 in 200 or 300 people from Northern European descent may have some degree of iron overload, and 1 in 10 people may be carriers of a gene of hemochromatosis. Now, the last lab is really a HCV antibody test, or hepatitis C virus antibody test. And this is actually one of the most important screening tools for your liver health, because it helps to identify past or present infection with hepatitis C virus, a leading cause of chronic liver disease worldwide. A positive test means you've been exposed to the virus at some point in your life. Many people with hepatitis C, they have absolutely no symptoms until the liver damage is advanced. And that's why hepatitis C antibody screening is critical for early detection. And the reason why everybody should have this test is because we now have very good cures for hepatitis C virus. And it's really easy and recommended for every adult to get at least one time in their life a screening for hepatitis C antibodies. Now, a positive test, it doesn't mean that you have an active infection. That requires a follow-up test called the hepatitis C virus RNA viral load level. Ultimately, even if all of these tests are normal, your liver still undergoes a lot of stress every day, detoxifying whatever you're exposed to in your air, in your food, in your lotions. So it's really important to target foods that can help your liver out. And if you want to learn more about that, watch the next video.